Hello and welcome to another edition of EntheoRadio, where we talk about shamanism, psychedelics, and altered states for healing. This is your captain speaking, Captain Hugh T Alkemi, also known as Trevahr. I'm here with a very special guest, and in the past we've had live episodes. This episode is recorded, pre-recorded for you, so that you can listen to it on all the podcast stations across social media, as well as on Spotify, Castbox FM, Google Podcasts, and a few others. My most recent discovery is that we are on iHeartRadio, which is really exciting and fun. I want to welcome to the show our special guest, Ryan. Ryan, how do we say your last name?
It's a bit of a tough one. So it's Munevar, so it's like a cow going moo, and then nay, and var like varnish, so Munevar.
So Ryan Munevar. And he is part of the Decriminalize California initiative for psilocybin and magic mushrooms. It's a very exciting time in the world right now. We are we're rallying and we're starting an initiative, and Ryan's going to talk a lot about that today. And I welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
So tell us more about what you've been involved in. Give us your background with Normal and a few of your other projects.
Yeah, so when I was 28, I got a chance to get a scholarship to go to a school out in Michigan called Lawrence Tech. And while I was there, I brought 2 ounces of weed from California and 1 ounce of hash. And when I got to campus, I basically rationed that as well as I could. So it lasted me about 4 months, which is a long time for me because I tend to smoke a lot of weed when it really gets down to it. And then I ran out of weed, and the weed that kids basically had on campus was like this horrible yellow brick weed that was honestly more beans, seeds, and twig than anything else. So I saw that there was this cup that was being held about 45 minutes west of where I was living, because I was just right like on 10 Mile, which is right above 9 Mile, which is Detroit, which is Wayne County. So I ended up going to this cup, and they gave me a pass. They gave me 4 passes because when I called them up, I wanted to be a judge, and they thought I was actually press. So they ended up giving me these 4 press passes. I trained up some of my friends in the dorm that I was living in. So the next morning we drove over there. One's working the camera, one's working a microphone, one's holding a clipboard. There I am basically organizing all that madness. And then they gave us the best press table that you could get. It was the first one when you came in. And everybody in Michigan thought that was the sign-up table for the convention / expos, the first International Ypsilanti Compassion Cup is what it was called.
Wow.
So everybody that was coming through ended up signing it, and I ended up getting close to 500 signatures for all the top people in the cannabis industry from Michigan. And then from there, I started networking with them, and pretty soon I was invited to a bunch of underground clubs because in Michigan, they were treated basically like speakeasies. So they would have like the first Friday of the month in downtown Detroit, which is not exactly the garden spot of society. We were in this cannabis counsel's law office. There was a practice there that focused on cannabis-related cases. And what ended up happening was I made a lot of friends, and I was shooting this documentary, and then I started working on the campaign out there to actually see what it was like to work on a full statewide campaign. So I learned a lot of the basic tricks that way, and I had a background in film production before this, so I was rather well organized. And unfortunately, the campaign, it didn't win, but that wasn't because of outside influence. It was just basically the people at the top of that were fighting against each other. And in the course of this, I made a lot of friends inside of Normal, and Michigan Normal as well. And then when I came back to California, I wanted to be done with politics. I didn't want to deal with any of that stuff, but there was a section that I shot, and it was a short video. It was basically a breakdown of how to do dry ice hash extraction, which is a novelty gimmick. That's not really the best way you should be extracting cannabis to later smoke it, but it was kind of cool. You basically break up dry ice, you toss it into this bucket, you put your trim and your weed in there, and then you put a 220 micron screen filter over it, you shake it, and it comes out like this green cocaine looking powder, and then you compress it, pack it down, and there it was. It was dry ice hash. So there was this company called Quick Trading Publications, which is Ed Rosenthal's company, his publication company. And I got contacted by a marketing person from his company, and they invited me to come over because they wanted that section. And I said, yeah, take it. And they were like, how much money do you want for it? And I'm like, I don't, just take it. I don't care. And so they gave me a bunch of books, and then they brought me over, and then they wanted to know if I wanted to go check out some of the campaigns for what was going on with cannabis legalization in the state of California. And this is back in 2015, leading up to 2016. So I went, I checked it out, and they wanted me to sign up with that one, but I decided I was actually going to play it out and just see what the other campaigns were doing. And so I basically kind of started the documentary back up again, and I started tracking. And at the time, by the end of the campaign, there was like 14 different initiatives that ended up signing off on it. And then from there, in the process of that all happening, I decided to start Monterey County Normal. And within like a week or two, I met one of my friends, Joey, and he basically became the deputy director. And then we started the first open source initiative. It was a Google Drive document that we had all the stakeholders in the cannabis industry in Monterey County contribute to. And there was like a bunch of different law offices, meetings were being held in. And we took the document over to the city of Salinas. It's the heart of the county. And keep in mind, Monterey County basically does like $4.5 billion a year for regular agriculture. That's lettuce, brassicas, strawberries, the berry picking industry. And then from there, the city council, it's their lawyer, in 13 minutes, he's like, great, this is perfect, we'll go with it. And we were expecting like a 3-hour meeting. And, we were done in 13 minutes, because normally what happens is you come in and there's like 500 different emails that have been printed off, and they have to scroll through it and they have to read them all. And in this case, because of the Google Drive document, all the comments were just going down the left-hand or the right-hand side of the screen. So it made it very simple, and it was the most elegant version of a draft you could put together and submit. And so the city council, they came together, they ended up voting on it, and then they turned on cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, the ability for analytical labs, and even some bulk deliveries. So after that, 2016 rolls in, and the election comes up, and the county decided to take a version of that draft, and they simulated it with some of the other drafts that they'd seen from other cities and some things that were already in practice, like in Los Angeles. They already had a couple of drafts that they liked. And so there was an amalgam that got put together, and then they asked us, we're board of supervisors at a county level. We don't necessarily know if we can run this and win this, but if you were to run it, like, how would you do it? And we're like, break it up into 4 basic initiatives, run them all simultaneously, and then see what happens. And so we ran it, and we won all 4 initiatives at the same time. And then from there, we started picking off cities along the 101 freeway and just started turning them on left and right through just aggressive lobbying and all kinds of shady stuff in general. That's what politics is. It's not a nice, decent sort of thing. And then from there, we started picking off cities along the coast. So we went after Seaside, we won that, and we went after Marina later. And in Seaside, in the process of all this, all these people, because we were doing this, they were like, could you help us get the permits for these things? And we're like, sure, what the hell? So we end up winning 1 dispensary permit inside the city of Seaside last year. And we turn on a dispensary with my partners for less than $400,000. And then this year, on April 1st, MedMen, we had a review process where the Bureau of Cannabis Control comes through, and we ended up scoring 100% perfect, which to my knowledge at the time was the highest and, like, honestly, the perfect score you could possibly get. No one else had even gotten that. And so then right after that, MedMen came in, which is this huge conglomerate company, and they ended up buying the dispensary for over $3 million. So from 400,000 to over 3 million, we basically did like a 980% return on the profit. And I was like, now I got this blood money, I might as well do something good with it. And I honestly hate the cannabis industry the way it was set up with Prop 64. And I hate the overregulation, the taxation, and the permits. So this is ironic considering this is the company that made all the money to actually do this. So I took that blood money, I dumped it all into this, and I decided I didn't want to have a hyper overregulated tax. And it's a sin tax. You're already paying taxes when you go into a regular dispensary. They just slap an extra one on. It's anywhere from like 5 to 15%. And at the same time, if you start out, there's a tax basically for cultivation. There's pretty much a tax for manufacturing. There's a tax at the point of sale. And you put all those together, they stack. So it makes it even worse. It compounds it. It's like compounded interest, but in this form, it's for taxes. So I thought that system was just absolute bullshit, because I hate taxes to begin with, the way that the government structures it across the board. And you can't even technically declare any tax write-offs except for cost of goods sold at the federal level, because it's still federally legal. So last year, middle of December, I decided I was going to actually draft an open source initiative for what I thought psychedelic mushroom decriminalization should look like. And so it's basically set up where it is, in essence, if this was to pass, it'd be legal to cultivate, manufacture, distribute in the form of donation, possess, consume, and transport. And the definition for personal use and personal possession amounts is basically whatever a person defines as their own amount needed. So instead of coming up with like an arbitrary number of like, well, you can have 1 pound of dried mushrooms, or you can have 5 ounces of dried mushrooms, it was like, no, a person could grow enough psychedelic mushrooms for themselves and keep them in their closet. And it only changes the definition if they would actually try to sell it for cash. So let's say you had 2 grandmothers that live side by side next door to each other. And you could think of it as one grandmother grows 10 pounds of psychedelic mushrooms. The other grandmother has, say, 50 pounds of organic, fresh garden tomatoes that she's grown. They could, in essence, trade them. So there's no real cash exchange, and there's no way the government can stop bartering, but this is the easiest, cleanest, most elegant way to do it. If the other grandmother was to try to charge like $900 a pound, then that basically turns into a sales model, which is not what we're trying to turn on. And the craziest thing is the cost to actually produce psychedelic mushrooms. For about $125, a person can produce enough psychedelic mushrooms in their closets to last themselves, their significant other, their family, and their friends for about a year. It's the cheapest psychedelic you can basically produce. It's incredibly easy. And another crazy thing is, for example, the state, I just had a call with the financial office because they have to do this thing called a fiscal impact report to find out, is this going to cost the government more or less money? Are they going to save money if it goes through this process? And it's like this. They wanted to know, like, how many plants would it be? And I'm like, well, it's actually not a plant. It's a fungus. It's in a different kingdom. And technically, you could have one mass of mycelial in an agar dish, which is about as big as my hand, or you could technically inoculate 200 pounds of wood chips, put it in your backyard, and it creates one giant mycelial mass that grows under the ground. So that's why personal possession amounts is simply determined by how much they have. Not really, it's by what they're doing with it when they're actually donating it to somebody else. And if they're donating it, and if it's actually a form of sales. So they seem to like that a lot. This will actually save the government, and that means the US taxpayers a little bit of money, since they're not going to be wasting it on arrests, prosecutions, incarcerations, and then the economic rehabilitation that comes after that. On the flip side, it also doesn't create money because there is no permitted system to actually sell these things, which means it can't be taxed, which means the government can't take money for it. And this is also the best way to keep commodification happening from large-scale corporations coming in, and just they're the only ones that have the permits, and they're the only ones you can get it from, and they charge you like $500 for like 5 hits in equivalency. So it's pretty elegant. It's very ambitious. The math is difficult. We have to get like 625,000 valid signatures from when the collection starts. We have 180 days to pull that off. And if we're able to do that, we then get it on the ballot, and then the citizens in California, they get to vote whether they want this to go through or not. And then on top of that, we have a very simple policy. It's basically, if you want to help out the campaign, you volunteer, you then donate, and then you share. When we're talking about sharing, it's both social media, but it's also because we teach cultivation classes. So we teach cultivation classes now in Los Angeles, and we're about to start teaching classes in San Diego, then Orange County, then San Francisco Bay Area, and Sacramento, because the goal is to get about 10,000 cultivators turned on across the state before the election goes off, because we know when they cultivate, they're going to end up sharing the psychedelic mushrooms with other people. And then most people, when they get to actually try it for the first time, it's an extraordinary experience. They're like, my God, I can't believe this is ever made illegal to begin with.
Right.
So I know that's a lot. So barrage me with questions. Go for it.
Yeah. So I want to speak to the ambition. It's like you have seen some success in the past, and that's so beautiful. And so you have experience. You've done a lot for cannabis in the past, and you're sort of stepping into magic mushrooms. You're stepping into psilocybin. How do you feel about the recent changes made to the law in Denver and the law in Oakland, California?
Denver is fantastic for the way they basically did it. As a citizens initiative, like what Kevin Matthews and his people did out there was one of those tipping points for society, honestly. And I just have mad respect for them as it is. What Oakland did is pretty damn good as well, because they expanded it beyond other substances from just psilocybin and psilocin. So they basically went after all plant-based entheogenics. As far as the validity and strength for one versus another, though, I prefer the initiative model over resolutions, because a resolution, and keep in mind, city councils pass resolutions at just almost every single city council meeting. They have a bunch of them. So it's like a good intent. but it's only a lowest level priority. So if you either had a city council member that comes on as a new city council member, they could push for a new resolution to shut down the old one. And you just almost saw that happen actually in Vancouver. We have a bunch of friends up there in Canada, and there was some city councilwoman who actually wanted to push a resolution to basically ban psychedelic mushrooms up there. Unfortunately, Decriminalize Canada was able to shoot that down.
Good.
But the problem is it's like an initiative that actually changes a law. A resolution, it's like a good idea, and it's something that they'll put their stamp on. But if you have like an asshole for a district attorney that still wants to make it a priority, they can do it. And quite often, the district attorney and a police chief, or if it's at the county level, for example, if you were to pass a resolution at a board of supervisor level, the sheriff can go after it. And so generally the police department and the district attorney's office are almost always in cahoots with each other because they always have been. That's how it kind of works. So I prefer the initiative model much more, but it's trickier in some ways. It's certainly more expensive, but to me, it's more of a concrete sort of solution. That being said, there seems to be a huge movement across the world, and honestly, a lot of it's in the United States, where people are just sick and tired of the drug war overall, because the best model period is basically the Portugal model. We decriminalize all drugs, not just psychedelics, but like all of it. The problem is the United States was the one who led the charge for the drug war to begin with because of the whole Nixon 1970 issue. And that is difficult because it's our own background that we're trying to clean up. And if the United States is able to do this, most of the other countries at that point, they won't have any reason to really hold on to their drug laws unless they're complete assholes, which there certainly will be some of them.
So I was checking out your document. I think this is your language version 2.0 on your website there.
Yep.
And I see in Portugal, they decriminalized all drugs in July of 2001. How's that going for them? And why is this a really important thing to include in your document?
The whereas sections, which is basically the findings and declarations, you want to show examples of other areas where this has gone through and it's gone through successfully. So basically, their drug rates have dropped, their crime has dropped, the cost and wasted amount of resources has certainly dropped. And as like a full suite model, it's worked out really, really well for them as a society. It's the kind of thing, though, you have to do all of it, or it doesn't work as well if you're just doing it in little pockets, because people, they kind of island hop from areas where some drugs are legal and some are kind of legal and some aren't legal. So there's lots of different things. If you want to completely eradicate the black market and the stigmas associated with it, you basically need to decriminalize all drugs. But the thing is, it's very difficult to do that in the United States. There are so many conservative holdout areas where they're going to fight this even after it goes through. Even at a federal level, there'll be states and counties that'll try to like stop people from being able to access this. It'll be like not in my backyard mentality. So when you show examples of areas that are good, it works out well. Like for example, it's weird. The Netherlands and Amsterdam, they technically, as a loophole, actually decriminalize psychedelic truffles. Technically, psychedelic mushrooms are still illegal, but that's the workaround because the mushrooms is the material that grows above the ground. The truffles grow beneath the ground in the soil. So that was their way of doing it. And to them, they treat it mostly as like, yeah, the tourists like to come over and trip on mushrooms. It's kind of tacky, but, you know, it's not really that bad. So we don't really care that much. And obviously, the Netherlands and Amsterdam haven't burned itself to the ground since they, you know, like this. As far as the United States is concerned, you target areas where they're super liberal. So for example, Denver, they led the charge with cannabis. So they already had a lot of experience with how that was, and it didn't destroy Colorado. And I mean, it didn't end the world, right? Some people were predicting that it would, but no, not really. And then when people realized, for example, that they could actually tax in some areas, they went a little bit overboard with it. And they just kind of tried to pigeonhole it in such a way that only some people could do it and make a lot of money, but other people couldn't because they had to go through them. So the difference of this is, instead of having a brick and mortar system set up like there is for cannabis, where you have to go to a shop and get your psychedelic mushrooms, you can just grow your own and you can basically donate them to other people and you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And then you can also, in essence, control the cost of what you're trying to get, as well as the quality of it. So it's like, I think a person, I mean, could you imagine if society told you you could only grow 10 pounds of tomatoes in your backyard and it had to be completely fenced off so nobody could see it? Because what if a child was to see a tomato growing on a vine? Would they lose their mind and become like some deviant of society? It's just insane that we had this stuff come through to begin with. And the real reason, by the way, there's a long history of the drug war, and there's some great examples and some really bad examples of how this went. Alcohol prohibition, a lot of people that were against the removal of that, and in essence, the legalization of alcohol, they pointed out that there was going to be more examples of domestic violence, there was going to be more beatings, there was going to be more fights, there was going to be, in essence, operating machinery and people getting killed with it, alcoholism. And statistically, they're actually right. But then you take a look at what happened with cannabis as another one. And by the way, the model for alcohol regulation, that wasn't necessarily a totally good win, because right now the majority of the alcohol that is sold is only controlled by 3 major distribution companies across the United States. And that sucks. So a lot of people think, oh, I have my favorite microbrew that's totally an indie thing. And it's like, nope, actually it's owned by a company that's actually owned by a bigger company above that. So you're still just buying the same alcohol. But I come from the background where I think a person should be able to do anything either good or bad to their body, because in essence, it is their property. For example, did you ever see the movie Footloose?
No, I didn't.
Basically, there's this small town that bans dancing because after some dance, 4 kids that were in high school got into a car accident. So they thought dancing must have been the cause for that, so they have to stop it. And then Kevin Bacon goes to this town, and he's from in the city or something, and he likes to dance and stuff. And so the town is freaking out about it. It's like, you know, that goes back to things like, what if you want to have piercings? What if you want to have sex with someone that's technically of the same gender, and how scary that might be, and how society would end if, like, they, you know, it's stupid stuff like that. It's your body. You should be able to do what you want. And when we ask average voters, for example, if you take a group of 20 voters and you ask them, okay, if you were going to be down to decriminalize psychedelic mushrooms, what is the primary reason why you personally would want to see this go through? And we give them the 4 basic questions. So are you going to do this for a medical reason? There's something biologically wrong with you that you feel psychedelic mushrooms will help with. Is there something therapeutic? That's the second one. Is there something that's mentally you've been damaged from either, you know, you saw your friend blow up in a war, you've been sexually traumatized, you suffer from some just general depression side thing that isn't necessarily biological, it could be environmental, this could help. And then the third one is technically, it's a sacrament, so it's part of your spiritual practice, part of your culture's religion. That could be anything from, like, you know, your people have been doing it for hundreds of generations, or you discovered this at Burning Man and it was absolutely wild and it's now part of your faith. And then the fourth one is basically freedom of choice. You should, like I said, you can do anything good or bad to your body, but it's your property, so you get to decide. If you ask a group of 20 people about it, you get 1 vote for medical, you get 1 vote for therapeutic, you get 1 vote for spiritual/religious, and you get 17 out of 20 rest votes for freedom of choice. And that's the primary reason. That doesn't mean it doesn't overlap with other things. But when we're pushing this math out to the actual public, we need to figure out what they would, in essence, want to vote for. And freedom of choice, it's such a, honestly, one still good trait of the American people that holds on to it, that we think we should be able to control our own bodies and our own destinies in that regard. So
Right.
it's wild. And what Denver did is phenomenal. What Oakland did is phenomenal. What other areas are going to try to do, like Berkeley's going to fire off soon enough. Hopefully they go through. Other states after this will try to do other things as well. So it's a pretty impressive time to be a part of the Renaissance.
Right. So it's like basically one of our tenets as Americans, as patriots. It's a life, liberty, right? Liberty and the pursuit of happiness. So if liberty is the freedom of choice to do what you will with your property, then there you go. That's nice that we're still like that. I mean, I wish we had a little bit more gumption, and, you know, the Anonymous and the Occupy movements had really kicked off in the right direction, and then the follow through kind of fizzled out.
It's a cyclical thing. People will get ramped up for a certain political thing, and then life happens, and they got to take care of other things, and their intentions change, or they realize it's not as easy as they thought it was going to be, or not as fun as they were hoping it was going to be.
Right.
So it's a lot of just miserable work. I'll give you an example. Yesterday I turned 40. It was my birthday, and instead of celebrating it, I ended up working till basically 9:45 at night, and then went to dinner by myself just to eat and come home and go to sleep because of how crazy the day was. So I was at it since 7 a.m. went all the way to then. So there's a lot of personal sacrifices in time, and it comes down to basically how much willpower you have to do that. And changing this stuff isn't easy. It's a monumentally difficult task to do, and this is the hardest project I've ever worked on. So we'll see.
You know, happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. It's
And
weird
since,
being 40, but
yeah.
whatever.
Congratulations on making this far and having these cyclical success stories to draw from in your personal experience. Since you have you technically have a .org, tell me about it, whether or not if you have it's a technical nonprofit, people donate to your decriminalize movement. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we're technically registered as a California mutual benefit nonprofit corporation, I believe is what it is. So you have the California status. We haven't even tried to apply for a 501c3 or C4 because technically a C3 can't actually do political work and a C4 can accept funds, but there's some other weird restrictions for it. So we're just basically a nonprofit registered in California. So we actually don't really get that many breaks for it. And if you donate to any campaign, even if it's the legit committee for the campaign, or if it's a PAC or it's a super PAC, you don't really get tax write-offs for it, which is a shame because that would be nice. But the government does that because they basically don't want people to, it's the equivalent of like money laundering through tax evasion to a certain degree if you actually donate to yourself as a nonprofit to clean the money. So people can donate to us, but they don't get any tax write-offs for it, but we're still technically a nonprofit as far as California is concerned. And you have to establish some form of a corporational structure or a committee in order to open a bank account in order for people to actually deposit into. And by the way, when you do any political work with a Schedule I substance as the focus, they make it extremely difficult to actually do. So for example, we got shot down by like 9 banks before we were able to get a bank. And then about a month into it, because we were only leaving like $100 in the bank account because we didn't want it to actually get shut down and then we lose all that money and wait for a cashier's check, because they'll write out the cashier's check to the actual Committee for Mycological Research and Education, which means we have to go deposit that into another bank account that actually has that account name with it. So when the 10th bank finally came through for us, one day I went to actually begin the process of depositing because we've been teaching these mushroom cultivation classes and they're making a lot of money. So I was trying to drop off $2,600 and I find out the bank account is locked. And then I call up our lawyer and our lawyer contacts them and he finds out the bank account had been closed like 2 weeks prior and that they sent a cashier's check back to us for $100, the wrong address, and there was no way to even appeal it. So the craziest thing is we basically use our PayPal account, which sucks because PayPal automatically takes like a 3% cut of everything that's going in or out. But that's the only way we can actually accept those forms of donations or payments for things. So a lot of the money comes in through donations. A lot of it comes in through the actual selling of merchandise. So that's buttons, that's stickers. We just started our t-shirt press line going. So we actually picked up like a dye sublimation printer to actually start printing out custom t-shirts.
Nice.
So it's difficult, and this happens with Schedule I substances and banks, because if the bank is ever hit up by the federal government, they could actually lose their FDIC insurance, and they don't want to lose that because to them, it looks like they're either money laundering for a drug cartel or it's just too close to a touchy subject. So that really sucked. And the thing is, we were actually honest and open with the banks because when you go in, you actually have to give them the corporate bylaws and the official articles of incorporation that came from the state that have been stamped. The state, they have no problem giving you this status as a corporation, even if you do deal with something closely related to a Schedule I substance. But the banks, on the other hand, they don't want to lose their FDIC insurance. So it's incredibly difficult. They finally just passed a banking act, it sounds like, at the federal level, so businesses can actually start to bank if they're in the cannabis industry. But psilocybin is not on that list yet. So it's still going to be tricky all the way to the end of the campaign. It makes it harder.
Yeah. Have you thought about accepting cryptocurrency or Bitcoin donations and things like that?
The issue is we've been going back and forth trying to define this. Cryptocurrency, because it's not from a centralized bank, could theoretically come from anywhere in the world, and it probably would in some degrees. The problem is you can't accept money for a U.S. initiative or act from outside countries, because otherwise, Russia could dump $10 million directly into somebody's account that could push their own agenda. So it's a non-U.S. agenda. So it's really tricky, and we're trying to get the solid answer back from them of whether or not we can accept cryptocurrency. And then the other issue with cryptocurrency is if we were to get it, we would honestly have to immediately withdraw it, because if we sit on it and hold on to it like stocks, I mean, you know how Bitcoin just goes up and down every day. And as much as it'd be fun to sit on it like baseball cards or stocks, it's not technically fiscally responsible for us to do that. So we'd have to get it, immediately withdraw it as cash. And then if you're sitting there with cash, it's really difficult to actually report the finances of the campaign if you're just taking out like, here's $20,000 in cash sitting in a safe somewhere. They really want to see a digital ledger from a respected and legit financial institute. So
and PayPal doesn't qualify as a ledger?
What does?
Does PayPal qualify as a ledger?
Hopefully. Eventually, PayPal will figure out what we're doing, and they'll probably pull the plug on us too. So what we end up doing is we spend all the money as fast as we can on what we need. So that's merchandise, materials, costs for things. It's tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much easier if you just bank.
Hopefully, PayPal maintains your accounts and stuff like that. But there is a way to directly either tie your cryptocurrency into the U.S. dollar amounts by way of Tether. It's a crypto that is worth $1 no matter what. It tethers to the U.S. dollar, or you can drop it into PayPal. Like now, you can sell directly to PayPal, so your Bitcoin becomes PayPal money right away.
Yeah, we've been looking at that. It's a tricky thing, and we have the same questions and we have the same ideas to solve those questions. And so we forward that over to them, and then maybe they get back to us, maybe they don't. So it's a constant back and forth. Like some of the government agencies we work with in this process, they're very responsive and very cool. And then others are extremely cold and distant, and they only work with us because they're required to by law, not that they want to. And
right.
It's a wild time. But if this changes, we can change a lot of other things. Like, I'll give you an example. Everybody asked the question, could we do digital petitions in order to save the cost? California doesn't allow that yet. But in the course of this process, we've actually made enough friends in the blockchain world, specifically because we were looking into the cryptocurrency, that we started hatching this plan to actually run in either 2021 or 2022 the last paper initiative process needed, meaning you could actually then collect signatures online, either with iPads or send it out there as an online digital petition through like Facebook, Instagram, and other social media. And then people could sign off on that, and then the government would actually have to respect that. And then also it basically plays into electronic voting. Electronic voting is really a touchy subject because it's a security risk issue from the digital side of things, of either the votes get intercepted or manipulated or changed after the fact somehow. And with all the the crazy hacking that's going on in the world right now, it certainly is a reasonable concern to have. So if we can actually develop a system to do that properly, we would basically send out, 500 to 1,000 volunteers to go get the 625,000 valid signatures needed to actually put this digital petition vote on the 2021 or 2022 elections. In 2021 would have to be a special election. 2022 would still be a general election equivalent. And then at that point, you could vote online, which would actually speed things up in a lot of different ways. And I do believe, I can't remember if it's one of the Virginia states is actually trying a version of that right now. So if theirs works, we'll either take that or we'll assimilate parts of it or we'll make our own. But that would be in order to drop the cost, because at this point, if all we had to do was push something like this online, we'd be done inside of like 2 weeks getting all the signatures we needed, as opposed to 180 days and 625,000 valid signatures that cost us a lot of money.
Right. So your team in California, South, I think, you're hitting the streets and you're getting signatures in a few months, or already?
We'll start anywhere from roughly 40 to 60 days, I believe. From when we submit, there's a 30-day public review process where anyone in the state of California, they put it on the government's website. You can basically go in there and make any comments that you want, either for or against it, or just like small grammatical changes for things that you might have screwed up on. And then there's 5 days after that 30-day review where we can basically edit it and then resubmit it, as long as it's with the original intent of what we were putting in there. Like, we suddenly couldn't just drop in the last minute, like, let's decriminalize heroin while we're at it too, and sneak that one past them. Like, that ain't gonna work. But if it's reasonable and germane to the original intent of the document submitted, they'll accept that, and then you get what's known as a title and summary and a fiscal impact report. So title and summary comes from the Attorney General's office. It's a non-biased review of what the actual language is that we're submitting, and then we have to attach that to the top of the signature sheets when we go out there. And then the people at the Fiscal Impact Review Office, they've been fantastic with us. So they just give the breakdown of whether this costs the state money or saves the state money. And then at that point, 180 days, 625,000 ballot signatures, and we're hitting the streets.
This is exciting times. Like, give people some examples. They can volunteer, they can donate. How else can this initiative move forward, and how soon? Like, so I'm hearing signatures, and then it goes into submission, and then so, like, realistically, put a timeline on when we could in California have legal psilocybin containing mushrooms.
If this was to pass, it would pretty much go into effect right after the November 3rd election, 2020. So that's just shy of, I think, about 400 days from now. If people want to get dialed in on the infrastructure, for example, we have close to 600 volunteers across all 58 counties in California now. And so the process works like this. You go to decrimca.org, you click on the volunteer button. It takes you to a Google form. You fill that out. You basically in the form give the basic contact information, some of your social media, which is optional, but we like that because it's good to spread the word. And then you list what county team you want to be a part of. So there's all 58 counties listed in a dropdown. And then there's a list of specialty teams, everything from the events team to the fundraising team to the volunteer team, which helps organize other volunteers, to, in essence, the communication team, which is actually like 4 different sub-teams for website, newsletter, Facebook, Instagram. That could be, for example, like moderator style accounts. And then we have the cultivation team if you actually want to help out and teach one of the classes or assist in the teaching of mushroom cultivation classes. And the way that's basically structured, if you have the money, you can pay $100 to $125 if you wait till like the last 3 days to sign up for the class. It's about a 2.5 hour long class, but we bracket it out for 3 hours total for a little bit of in and out just to get the stuff in and as well as to get the stuff out. You show up, we teach you basically how to select your medium. In this case, we teach people popcorn because it's super cheap and a readily available grain. You then sterilize that, you put it into these jars. You then inoculate the jars either with a spore syringe, which is a fluid containing psychedelic spore mushrooms, basically. And the other method is grain-to-grain jar transfer, where there's already a jar that has a bunch of the popcorn that's basically been covered in the white mycelial mass. You shake it up, it's almost like brittle. And then in a clean box, which we show them how to make, you pour a little bit into each one of these other jars, and you just keep doing that. So you can take one jar and basically turn it into 10 jars automatically with how much is in there. And then we show them monotubs, which are the ones we like to use just for a start, are these 7-gallon HDX black tubs you can get from Home Depot. We drill out these little 2-inch holes, one on each side. You give them a substrate layer, which is a combination of cocoa coir, vermiculite, perlite, and sometimes a little bit of coffee to change the acidity level of it. Like literally brew a pot of coffee and pour it in there. And then at that point, we give them a schedule, share a Google Drive document with them, which like rehashes all those steps so they can do that when they go home. And they basically leave with a tub, like a clean box, a monotub, a jar as an example of what the material is. We don't actually give out any of the psychedelic materials because by law we still can't do that, but we can show them like every single step in the process. And then they get a little like 2-gallon bag of substrate medium that they can lay down in there. And the other cool thing is, you know, they obviously network with other people in the class, which may have connections, you know, just saying. So at that point, we teach them how to do it, and hopefully the only thing we ask of them is to go do it and show other people how to do it as well, because the point is to share this knowledge. Right. And then what's wild is if a person, you know, maybe they're hitting hard times and financially they can't afford the $100 or $125. In that case, we give them the option of you can actually show up at the campaign office, and if you volunteer for a day's worth of work there, we'll give you a pass so you can take the class for free. So at least the campaign gets some work out of it, and we turn on another person, which hopefully is going to go turn on like 10 more people right after that. Like, it's going to sound totally absurd. Did you ever see that movie Dune or read the book Dune? Do you remember? Basically, he takes. I've read
that book like 9 times.
Okay, that's honest.
All the follow-up books.
Well, the first one, I mean, honestly, in my opinion, that's probably the best book on psychedelics, because the spice melange, in my mind, like psychedelics, if you combine them all together and they open your mind, it literally created a new genetic class of humans that were the space travelers, the pilots in essence. So I like to think about what psychedelics would look like for the future. But there's one part in there that I really appreciate is when Muad'Dib, you know, the lead character, he's kind of like the Che Guevara sci-fi Jesus sort of character wandering around. When he teaches people the wielding way with those weapons, and he takes 100 of the best freemen and he trains them how to do it, and the goal is so they can go teach another 100 freemen below them how to do the same tricks. That's the same mentality we have for the psychedelic mushrooms. So if we can teach these people how to do it by any means necessary and get it out there properly, it's great. So that way I never have to listen to people bitch that the class is too expensive, and then I never have to listen to people bitch that people get to take the class for free, because technically there is a trade-off in their time to go learn something. And what do they do when they come in? I mean, they're helping us make buttons. We have this whole button press making machine, which is awesome. Like any activist group should go spend the $200, $300 to get a button press machine and all the little pieces together for it, because it's perfect. And then other people, you know, they're helping out with the social media stuff, or they're helping us drill out the monotubs for the next upcoming classes, or they're networking and contacting people. And just about everybody has something that they can contribute or work to the campaign overall. And so when you sign up as a volunteer, within 24 to 48 hours from that, you get a little invite to the Slack team, because we organize all the counties. There's literally 58 different counties on Slack. And if you're in your county, you just get assigned to that automatically based off of what you filled out on the form. And then below that, if you want to be part of one of the other teams, we collectively talk amongst each other online. And that's also the fastest and most dynamic way I can respond to people, because I'm on Slack all the time. So there is no real buffer or series of flapper people that have to get to me to talk to me. So if somebody wants to say something or has an idea or an immediate response is necessary, they can just straight up hit me up on Slack. And from being a volunteer to being a middle rung person on a campaign to being a high end person on a campaign, that level of transparency and accountability is extraordinarily refreshing to have. So they tend to get super motivated that they can actually talk to us and get to us. And it's busy. Like there's a lot of things going on simultaneously. So it's kind of my way of like being able to manage all of that stuff and jump around.
Very nice. Very nice. It's funny. I really draw from Dune, and I really appreciate your connection there and using that as a metaphor for what you're doing, because it was originally inspired by the magic mushrooms, the books and the writing. It was, and it's even a citation in one of Paul Stamets's books that it was inspired by the author of Dune, because he was a well-known mycologist of his time in the 1960s and 70s.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
His son carries the torch pretty well too later on in the rest of the books that go on. For me, Dune, I always get asked the question, like, what are my favorite and most influential psychedelic books? And most people think I'm going to go for like a hardcore academic route. And trust me, I got a couple of those under my belt as well, but I definitely would go with Dune. I would go with, did you ever read the book Stranger in a Strange Land?
No, but it's on my list.
Okay.
A lot of friends use that as their reference point.
That's a great one. But the spice melange for me is pretty much the amalgam metaphor for all psychedelics put together at once, and then what humanity could become. Like, for example, a lot of the problems we have in the world right now, they need to be solved by people that can think in a new way, in a creative way. And psychedelics, when they got shut down, for example, even taking it one step further back, the drug war that really started was because it wasn't a war on people, it was a war of economy. They wanted to stop the paper industry. The paper industry basically wanted to stop the hemp industry from getting any foothold, because a lot of them had already invested heavily into timber. And then when you have the Hearst family jump in as a media mogul, they just started crushing it out. And so the easiest thing was you target specific groups. So they went after African-American jazz singers and Mexicans. And they basically said, if your daughters do the marijuana, they're going to be having sex with black people. You don't want that to happen. How do you? And then America ate that shit up, and it was horrible. And then after that, when the civil rights movement started coming through and civil disobedience was a big thing, it's not illegal for people to protest, or because of the First Amendment to tell the president to go fuck himself, or to basically show up in large groups and say what you guys are doing is wrong and we're here to stop that. And because it wasn't illegal to actually form up together, what they realized was they probably had marijuana and psychedelics on them at these rallies. So let's just go through it and do blanket raids, and then that's actually how we go after them. So it was like one of Nixon's top guys came up with this strategy and idea, and that's what they went with. And so they knew if they went through the audience, they could bust people for LSD, and other psychedelics, and that's what really screwed it up. And at the time, when psychedelics, especially lysergic acid, when people really started doing the proper research on that, could you imagine how much hopefully better and certainly more advanced and well-evolved society would be in the United States as well as the rest of the world if instead of banning it, we'd actually doubled down on the research back then? I mean, what we would know about the human mind and consciousness, that some people require a scientific backgrounds or a scientific backing before they can consider it as valid information. I mean, indigenous people and tribes have been using psychedelics since basically the beginning of time, since before recorded history. But it wasn't until they actually started getting scared that there was going to be super change in the US that they went nuts against it. So I think we've honestly lost about 50 years worth of our evolutionary path as human beings and creatures of what we could become, simply because somebody was threatened by this and they had to stick up their ass the wrong way. So Dune would be like what the future would look like to a certain degree if we could evolve ourselves off.
Right. I absolutely agree, and I encourage you to read all the books if you haven't. Have you read Heretics? That's my favorite one.
Yeah. Oh, another good random science fiction book, not to tangent too much, but did you ever get a chance to read The Forever War?
No, I didn't. I am just hearing about it from you just now. What's that about?
Forever War is basically, it was written before the Vietnam War, but it imagined there was a group of scientists that come together in the mid-'80s. Looks like 1983 to 86, I think is what it was. And they're about to go to war against an alien race that's many, many light years away from Earth. And so they take the top PhD graduate students in like chemistry and physics and astrophysics and engineering, and they train them up in these mech suits to go fight these aliens. But what happens is when they get in a spaceship, they cryosleep them. So they spend like 25, 30 years going to the other star system. They wake them up. They fight these aliens for about a week. They get back into the ship and they come back to Earth. So it's like, 70 to 100 years, depending on which battle they had to go to, keeps changing. So every time they come back to society is completely changed. So when they leave at one point, they come back. Everyone in society is addicted to drugs. They come back the next time. Everybody is now highly enlightened, but very boring. They come back the next time. Everybody's now kind of brownish, like Polynesian looking, because all the races kind of like interbred with each other and made this like neutral tone. They come back another time. Population is exploding. It's not looking good. They come back the next time. Homosexuality had actually been enforced by the state in order to like curb population control. They come back the next, and it's just this trip that keeps happening, because even though they go fight the aliens, which is kind of cool in itself, every time they come back, it's massive culture shock. So if you get a chance, just check that one out on the side. That's actually another one that's fantastic in a weird way. And then
this is Joe Handelman.
Halderman?
Yeah, Halderman.
And that's a fantastic one worth checking out. And then like the black sheep of the bunch, which I think is one of the greatest books ever written, is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. When I read that as a kid, I was like, this is perfect. Like, oh God, the way he talked about things was classic. And he was also like a political nut, like Fear and Loathing on the campaign trail, just by himself, going around, just how he critiques politics at the time. Oh my God, it was priceless. So Hunter S. Thompson, I was just a huge fan of his style of writing in general. But I bring that up in some psychedelic things like, oh no, that shows all the bad side of psychedelics. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's not just psychedelics. There's all sorts of drugs he's talking about in there. And I thought that was the greatest ride ever, because he was just nailing society left and right for everything that was bullshit and holding him accountable. And, he critiques himself too, incredibly hard throughout the entire process. So that one is just off the charts with me too. But yes, more questions. Sorry.
Absolutely. So I wanted to bring it back to your personal experiences. I mean, we hear a lot about your sort of trippy experience with growing up and reading these books and being influenced by our culture, which was in some ways influenced by counterculture and the need to break through and to re-deviate into homo evolutionary people. We're going in the wrong direction, I think, in our society, and we've been on this really slow train to the apocalypse. And people like Maynard James Keenan of Tool know this, and they put it through their music, and it's pretty amazing. And
that cover for that, gorgeous, with the little LCD screen that was in there. Oh my God,
yes,
that looks great. That was classic.
That looks great. Yeah, they know this. People like Alex Gray know this, and they're putting it out there in so many ways with their art and their music. And I think you've been influenced by it, and I've been influenced by it. And most of our society is somehow shut down and zombified by the rest of everything else that they're paying attention to. So how did you step into, I mean, we heard your story about cannabis, but how did you step into something that was more countercultural, like psychedelics, in a positive way that helped you become who you are to make change in the world?
Well, when I was much younger and I worked in film production for the start, I went to school at 16 and a half for radio, TV, film down in Orange County. And at the time, I mean, not to say straight edge, because that honestly inclines a heavy religious background, which I'm not. I'm basically like a hyper-militant atheist when it gets down to it, but I try to keep that shit on the down low. And what ended up happening was I didn't get drunk till I was 19. I didn't smoke weed actually until I was 23. And I didn't do psychedelic mushrooms until I was 25. And when I was in LA, I married an actress right before moving up here, and I was married for 4 years. And then when I was 25 and I got divorced, I went back down to Orange County. And when I was living in Laguna Beach, I was briefly dating a woman who, I mean, she was a troublemaker. Like, she's not necessarily the person that should be your first guide. She was gorgeous. She was very free-spirited. She was also a compulsive liar, a kleptomaniac, and a borderline arson. Like, she was a pyro. Like, so the very first time I actually did psychedelic mushrooms, I just moved into this apartment in Laguna Beach, and the whole neighborhood was there, and they were really nice. It was almost like some weird European village greeting, because it was this cul-de-sac, and there was just all these people who knew all each other. So they showed up, and they brought wine, and they brought food and stuff. It was a proper greeting. It was really simple. And she was there, and she wanted to celebrate, and she wanted to surprise me. So she ditched out for like 20 minutes. I don't know where the hell she went. And then she came back, and she had this new bag with her, and she drags me inside this apartment, and I was talking on the couch to one of my neighbors next door. He was a nice guy, but I only saw him like one night because he moved the next day. But he was really like, he built furniture, and he was a super Christian that was very introverted in a lot of ways, but he was trying to like say hello. And she's very gorgeous, and she drags me into this apartment, and then she pours out this bag onto this table I had, because I wasn't able to get this bed upstairs. So I had this air mattress that I was sleeping on, and I'd set it up earlier that afternoon. And then I had this really nice glass desk that I used for my computers, and she just starts pouring all this stuff out. And this giant like statue of like a bull, this bronze bull, just falls out and breaks the damn table. But she doesn't care, because she's very free-spirited. And so like all these other things start falling out of the bag, and I'm like, what the fuck is all this, right? And she's like, I got this for you. And I was like, what is all the rest of this stuff? And she's like, I stole it. And I'm like, what do you mean you stole it? And she's like, I stole it. And I'm like, why? And she's like, so I could burn it. And I'm like, why are you going to burn it? Because I stole it. I don't want to get caught for it. I'm like, why did you steal it? I was like, what the fuck? Right? And she's like, don't worry about it. So she starts, one of the things that was in this bag was like a whole bunch of dried mushrooms, right? And so it was a big brown leather bag. She'd stolen the bag too, apparently. And so out comes these mushrooms. I don't know if she'd broken into somebody's house up the road or whatnot, but it was just absurd. And so we start doing psychedelic mushrooms, and she's into fire poi. Like, so she likes spinning stuff around. And at the time, in the room I was in, I do this thing everywhere I go where I whenever I'm working on a project, I basically tape up a bunch of sheets of paper, or at this point, I was working on a science fiction script about what would happen if 1,000 people, or 120 people went to Mars to start the colonization there. And then one day they look back at Earth and it's been completely incinerated with nuclear fire. And they basically have to start society over again. And it's like they get to decide how they want to treat each other. So it was a clever project. And on the wall were all these cutouts from all these astronomy and science magazines of like all kinds of different star clusters and things about Mars and terrain and stuff. And it's all taped up to the wall. And so, we were doing what adults do at this point, and she was basically there in the room naked spinning these fire poi things, and I'm just like, I'm starting to trip, and I'm like, this is the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen, right? But as I'm looking over, her fire poi starts scraping the side of the wall that had all the pictures on it, and that shit starts to like go up in flames. Like, it's like a little flame would go up and then it would seal back against the wall, and so the room starts filling up with smoke. She doesn't give a shit, because she's just in her world, just going as fast as she can go. And I'm like, from like in bed, very aroused, jumping up to put the fires out, and then getting back in, and then jumping up again, and finally opening up my window, right, just to let in air. And she's like, don't do that. It only adds oxygen to the fire. And I'm like, we're going to die in here. We can't breathe. And then my very religious neighbor he makes like little tiny wooden furniture as his hobby, and then he actually worked as some kind of like a production manager for an actual furniture wood company. He's standing outside, like holding like a box of I don't know what, and he just sees this beautiful naked woman just spinning this stuff around, and then me jumping up and down from bed to like do this and open the windows. And so technically, that was my first experience actually tripping on psychedelic mushrooms, and I loved it. I mean, like not the best guide in the world because she honestly could have killed us, but like the experience for me was phenomenal. At that point, I was like, this is fucking amazing. And by the way, I do have a hierarchy of how I rank substances, drugs, and medications. And in this case, at the time, because I wasn't even thinking about it for any therapeutic or even religious reasons, it was just a good time, basically, I process it this way. If the drug, while I'm taking it, makes me feel good, that's a plus. If the drug the next day doesn't give me a hangover or anything that makes me feel sick about myself or hurts me, that's another plus. If I'm not addicted to it, that's like the final trinity. That's like the perfect combination of things. So for example, you would take alcohol, the way I would rank that. When I'm drinking it, yeah, it feels great. If I drink too much of it though, the next day I have a hangover and I feel absolutely miserable. And as far as an addictive substance, it's right up there. It's pretty damn bad. So I do have a hierarchy and scale of what these things are, but that also doesn't mean I think people shouldn't be able to go do that. That'd be like me trying to outlaw pineapple on a bacon pizza or something like that. Like they want to do it, they want to do it. As long as it's not hurting too many other people, although certainly there is an argument for the whole vegan lifestyle and how we're destroying the world with animals. But then again, when it comes to mushrooms, there's myco-remediation, because this is one of the saddest things about the mushroom world as it is. The average biology program in a college doesn't even have a class on mycology. It's a field that gets underfunded, under-researched, understudied for all the basic mycological benefits that exist outside of regular psychedelics. There's actually a mycophobia that began a long time ago in this country, not because of psychedelics, but because when people came from other countries and they didn't have the proper identificational knowledge to actually determine what they were picking in the fields, they basically said, all mushrooms are poisonous, don't eat them. That's why when you go into a grocery store, there's actually not much of a mushroom section in there. There's way more for vegetables than there are for mushrooms. But for example, mushrooms have an incredibly high amount of protein. They're very low on the energy and resource requirement needed to grow. If you screw up a grow, you can always process the material back down and use it again. It's one of the most sustainable food sources that exist. And if you were in a spaceship going to another planet, everybody always sees like these giant greenhouses in there, but you never see a single mushroom. In reality, it's far more efficient if you have basically 2/3 of your biological foodstuffs being grown would actually be a form of mushrooms, and the other third would actually be vegetables and fruits. They don't require the same electrical load, for example, that all other plants need because they're not actually plants. They don't need photosynthesis. And like humans, the one downside is they'll actually produce carbon dioxide because like animals require oxygen in order to process things. So in the college world, there's virtually no research really being done. It's mostly done by amateur people and some people that are absolutely brilliant. So for example, Paul Stamets is basically like Jesus to the mycological world. Like the guy really is getting the word out there and he spreads the knowledge and he talks about his own personal story. Yeah, Paul Stamets. Yeah, just being in the trees, like shaking, and he gets over his whole stuttering issue because of that during a lightning storm, like a true proper meeting. So like Paul Stamets is doing an extraordinary amount of benefit for the mycological world. And what's crazy, name me one person in the plant world that people will reference of the same caliber of what Paul has done single-handedly for an entire kingdom of organisms on the planet. I don't know anybody.
Yeah.
Right? It's rough. When it comes down to it, though, I hope this is a weird offshoot benefit. As people try to understand psychedelic mushrooms, I hope a lot of that research is going to pan over into regular mycology research. Because, for example, mycological and remediation is one of the biggest things. So, for example, let's say, especially in the United States, we overproduce meat. Meat's actually based off of the corn industry. So corn by caloric intake is the highest density you basically get as a commercial agricultural product. The only reason we actually grow lettuce is because it's actually energy deficient pretty much when you eat it. This is the first time in history where people have such an abundance of sugar because you take corn, which is subsidized by the government, you then process it in high fructose corn syrup, and you add that shit to 85% of the food products on your shelves to begin with. That's when you go to a grocery store, You look around, people that are homeless are actually now dying of things like obesity and type 2 diabetes. It's like, this is unheard of. You go back 100 years ago, if you were homeless, you were skin and bones because you didn't have enough food to eat because there wasn't enough energy in that. We now produce lettuce, which actually isn't that good of a product to actually grow for the environment, but it's good for us because it balances out all the extra energy we now have in such abundance because of how well we've actually figured out growing corn, which then, of course, in turn feeds the dairy industry, which then, of course, also in turn feeds the meat industry. So when you have these giant cow, they're not even farms really, they're basically factories at this point that will coast along the side of a riverbank. Or if you have a pig farm, for example, and you're feeding them all this grain, and you're producing such an extraordinary amount of waste, when it rains, the rain actually pushes literally all that shit into the water. And when it hits the water, it basically such a high nitrogen content, it kills all the standard life forms that exist in there, like fish. So you end up wiping out entire fish populations. And then all that horrible shit basically runs into like the Gulf of Mexico, for example. And so you have these massive algae blooms, which then, of course, wipes out whole other ranges of fish that had nothing to do with the original part of the process. So what's clever is you can actually basically take certain types of mycelium, inoculate these giant bags filled with straw. You can line them along the riverbanks so that when there is runoff that happens from all of that super nitrogen-rich shit that's basically coming past, the nitrates in it, it actually traps that, reprocesses it, turns it into a form of mushroom that when it breaks down, it doesn't actually cause any of these problems. And you can actually stop the environmental impact of what's happening for a meat-obsessed industry that already exists here. If people, for example, would actually transfer out their diet and basically make it a third mushrooms and probably about 2/3 fruit and vegetables, it'd be a far healthier race of people, creatures, and the planet itself wouldn't necessarily be in as bad a shape as it's in. Because, for example, a lot of people will say the only way you can actually stop true environmental damage, or at least slow it down, is to stop breeding as much as you do. Some people say that's a racist or a classist-sized argument. Same time, though, we're just overproducing way too many people on this thing. And you said it was like, what, was it a slow train wreck, basically?
Yes.
It's starting to accelerate, though. That's the problem because of how many people. I mean, in about, 10 years, we're going to be at something like 9 billion. In 20 years, we're going to be at 12 to 15 billion. We're not making the world better. We're making it worse.
Either. Like, it's a downhill. We're slowly going downhill. And so, of course, it's accelerating because of downhill.
Yeah, it's rough. So we need to fundamentally change a lot of things. And things that frustrate me just in society as a whole is that people are freaking out about psychedelics, whether or not they should be decriminalized or legalized. In my mind, of course, they should all be decriminalized. Just be done with it. So we could actually focus on other problems that are actually going to kill us. So right. It's a tricky thing, but it's human nature at this point. And to educate them is probably the hardest part overall, but people are starting to pick up on it. And people are well aware that the drug war just did not work. It's not working at all, and it's starting to fall apart. And cannabis, for the legalization that happened with that pretty much led the charge for all the other things that are going to come after it.
Right. And I kind of see this as domino number 3. Your initiative might be domino number 3 in the Denver, Oakland, and now maybe the whole state of California.
Yeah, well, Oregon's going to give a shot at their version too coming up, so we'll see.
Great. I'm excited about that, and I hope to connect with both the gentleman who did the initiative in Denver and anyone who's leading the charge up in Portland, because we really need to get our
Matthews from Denver. He's in Portland. They're in a little bit of a political storm right now because they actually took a decriminalized model out of theirs, so now it just looks kind of like a brick and mortar thing. So they got some political stuff to do and figure out. We'll see.
Yeah, I heard the last time from some people that lived up in Oregon, it was going to be like you'd have to get a government-sanctioned license to be possessing and sharing mushroom experiences with people, and you'd have to go through like a seminar training for that.
There's a therapy status you have to be applied, so you actually have to say that there was something like psychologically or medically wrong with you in order to get it, which, if you go back to it though, like 17 out of 20, at least California voters, they want freedom of choice. They want to be able to do it without any reasoning behind it.
Yeah.
And it's strange too, because for example, I get asked this question every once in a while for people to get popped when they're basically buying psychedelics online. U.S. Customs will intercept it if it comes in from outside of the U.S. And they're like, I'm in California, I'm a resident. do I have any religious protections? And unfortunately, no, you don't. In California, they don't go off of religious protections for controlled substances. It's actually one of the few states in the union that doesn't even have any provisions for it. So if you have to build that in there, you then have to justify religious reasoning why you should have access to it. And then if you go the therapeutic route, then you have to actually go in there and like publicly say there's something wrong with me that I need help with, or you have to release your medical records to a certain thing. And for example, back in the Prop 215 days, this shit used to happen about once every month. Collective or dispensary or mobile delivery service would end up getting raided, and they would take all of the people's medical records that had submitted because they just wanted to have access to it. So we felt, for example, just removing all of those necessities and just basically saying it's decriminalized and you don't have to justify it to anybody actually gives a person far more personal privacy and protectional rights, and they don't have to go through any of that bullshit. And then at the same time, because this one is basically 18 and up, but technically it also has a built-in provision that if you get caught as a minor and for some reason you are convicted, it's just a drug education program and it doesn't go on your permanent record. And also, if you have parental consent, they throw it out. So basically that was our workaround for kids that are under the age of 18, because the group that gets impacted the most, honestly, is young people. And in the drug world, that's basically African Americans and Mexican males between the ages of 13 and 21. So we think that's really shitty that happens. So that was our way of basically taking all the teeth out of anything they could do to attack them. And it seems to be pretty collectively good so far. Most people are down for that. There'll be some conservative people that are afraid that like psychedelic mushrooms, if they get into the hands of children, it will be end times. But I mean, there's not much we can do to convince them at the point, because that's generally coming from just massive indoctrination that we don't necessarily beat out.
Right. Someone who's a bit dogmatic or stagnant in some philosophical way.
Yeah.
So right now, if you're listening, you're tuning in, we have Ryan Munevar, and this is Hugh T Alkemi on the EntheoRadio podcast. And we are encouraging you to take action as a resident or a neighbor of California. Come in and support the campaign by going to Ryan's website. Give us the site.
Decriminalize.org.
And sign up as a volunteer, maybe make a donation. They can do all that through your site, right?
Yep.
I'm personally very excited about showing up to one of your cultivation classes, because in the past, I've taught a lot of my friends about mushroom cultivation, and I've actually worked with the San Diego Mycological Society as a board of directors member for a long time. Okay. And I'm really super excited about seeing what you guys have going there. And I feel like the information that you're sharing is like a grain to grain mycelial transfer for and if one jar can give 10 jars, 10 jars can give 1,000 jars, or 100 to 1,000 to 10,000, then you're going to have your signatures, and we're going to have a whole lot of change on our hands.
And by the way, a huge shout out to all the local mycological societies. There's probably 8 to 9 of them in the state of California. San Diego Mycological Society is right there at the top of the list. There's the Santa Cruz Fungus Federation. There's SOMA up in SOMA, basically. Sonoma. There's Humboldt. They have one apparently that's pretty good. There's like, I guess 3 technically in San Francisco and 1 sort of in Oakland. There's the LA Mycological Society. So if you just even want to learn about regular mycology, go there. About 1/3 of the members are down for psychedelics in general, but the other 2/3, they're there because they like wild foraging and they love cooking with mushrooms. And honestly, the potlucks, at least at all the ones I've been to so far, have been fantastic. Everybody comes with like some customized mushroom dish, and you're just sitting there eating and drinking and having a good time talking to people. So just educate yourself more. And the government, one thing they can't stop you from doing no matter what is educating yourself. And there's books online, there's videos online, and there's literally hundreds of different techniques on how to grow. And you just modularly put them together in any way is most comfortable for you or that you enjoy, because just experiment and learn and share.
You know, Ryan, I may pick up the flag a little bit and carry it for San Diego, at least the community here, because I really feel like a bit of fungophilia is a lot of anarchy in the US of A, and I'm excited.
Not bad, not bad.
So
when's the next SD meeting? You know, I think they
it's Monday. stmyco.org. You can get on that. And in San Diego Balboa Park, it's a Monday night. This Monday, I forgot the date. Let me grab that real quick. Monday the 7th.
Yeah, I'm actually scheduled to go down there for that. In fact, I'm coming down technically tomorrow morning, or actually, no, I'm going up tonight, or I'm going down tonight to meet with Bronner, David Bronner over in Vista at 11 a.m.
Dr. Bronner's son, yeah.
Yeah, because it sounds like he's down to support us to a certain degree, so we're certainly going to take that meeting. So I don't know what your schedule's like later tomorrow, but are you in Orange County or primarily San Diego?
I'm in San Diego, North Park, Hillcrest.
Okay, I'll be in the Vista area tomorrow.
You'll be in the Vista area. Yeah, I'm going to probably go up to Encinitas in the evening time, so I'll be in North County in the evening time.
All right, cool. And I'll definitely see you there on Monday at the San Diego Mycological meeting, okay?
Excellent. That is, it'll be my first time back in like 7 years, and I think it's our first or our second meeting of the season. So it pauses during the summertime because it's dry, and it's restarting right now.
Perfect.
So yes, Balboa Park, if anyone's listening, Balboa Park, I forget the room, but it's Casa del Prado address. You can find it on Facebook. You can find it on sdmyco.org, and join the club, and it's free public, or you can pay for a household membership, or you can connect with Ryan and his group on, what was it, decrim.ca or decrimca.org, right?
Yep, decrimca.org. And that's also, if you need to look us up, it's decrimca.org on Facebook, or it's decrimca on Facebook, decrimca on Instagram, decrimca on Twitter. So they're all synced up that way. So easy to find.
You know, I'd love to have you back on and have a discussion about microdosing, because we didn't even get to cover that topic. And I think it's a really therapeutic way for our society to move.
Would you want to talk about it for a minute?
No, I think we're going pretty long. So let's schedule again. Let's schedule again for after I get up to see you guys do a cultivation thing, because I think you have a cultivation class in October, right?
We're supposed to have 2 of them in October in LA, 1 in San Diego, 1 in Orange County, 1 in Santa Cruz, 2 potentially in San Francisco, and 1 in, I believe it's San Rafael. So it's just North Bay.
All in October?
Yeah. There's also the fantastic fungi screenings that are coming up. I'll get you the better dates for that, but I know there's one coming up in San Diego, and then the next month there should be one in Encinitas. So both in San Diego County.
And that's with what, the Aware or the Awake Project or something?
Aware Project is one of the co-sponsors on that, I believe, down there. And there's also, they have them all over the place. There's going to be one in San Francisco. There's one next Friday, or this Friday in Santa Cruz. Next Thursday is SF, San Diego. Just check out fantasticfungi.com and just look them up, and they'll have the list of all the screenings up there. And that's going to be a fun movie.
So let's make a point to have you back on after I make it to one of those cultivation meetings. Cool. So then we can talk about the content of that meeting and get really excited and a little bit shroomy. And then maybe in that same title, we can also dedicate some time to microdosing and talk about the therapeutic dosages, a lot less than psychedelic dosages, because I find that may be the right direction for pushing things through, at least from a philosophical and a therapeutic argumentative model, like how society ultimately evolves into that future society that Frank Herbert saw in the Dune, is that basically they were using the spice melange as a geriatric, an anti-aging and a longevity substance. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding in my own personal microdosing that feels and rings true.
Well, they also used it to basically transcend space and time in there, which is the funner side. I mean, it's the trippier side of things, but the basic biological benefits of microdosing in general, they're going to discover some extraordinary things that a lot of people already know, but a lot of people don't know or don't trust unless they see hard science behind it. And it's a miracle substance all the way. Psilocybin processed down in psilocin when it's inside of you is just extraordinary.
Yeah, and so I want to say thank you and express gratitude for making the initiative the way you did it. It actually feels really on point for like being more of a barter, being more of a grassroots, being more of an anarchy, non-government involved thing, and it allows people to actually kind of just like self-regulate. Whereas the stuff I grew up in Southern California, and San Diego's born here, and yeah, that 215 and proving yourself, medical, this and that, and how many plants you were allowed to cultivate. Gosh, that was so just it was so out of alignment. It just felt inauthentic. And
Yeah,
the way our initiative is different.
It wasn't a perfect time and it wasn't a perfect solution, but honestly, a lot of people, they still prefer the 215 model to 64 because the whole goal of, by the way, legalizing cannabis was basically to have high quality cannabis at a cheap price with tons of strain availability. And what we ended up getting was we do have a lot of strain availability, but the cannabis is not cheap. It's now more expensive than it should have ever been. And that's a hassle. So, and by the way, our initiative, because it's still an open source one, and that's still a philosophy we believe that most initiatives going forward in government should have, we call this one the people's model. So there's still technically time over the next 2-3 weeks where if you want to make a comment or you want to critique it, certainly send it our way because we still have that extra 5 days after the initial 30-day public comment period to make any additional changes. So it's not entirely set in stone. It's like 95% in stone. So you still have a slim window if your listeners are inclined. So check it out.
Yes. And so you're listening to EntheoRadio podcast. Please go visit Ryan's website. Check out his initiative. If you can contribute, read it thoroughly, see if it's what you like, and be part of this change, because I know it, with the right inoculation, our culture could go from fungi imperfecti to fungi perfecti. We'll say it like
that. Beautiful. Thank you so much, man.
So yes, this is Captain Hugh T Alkemi and Ryan Munevar with EntheoRadio signing out. Thank you very much.
All right, peace.